For over 20 years the case of the missing shopkeeper haunted the small town. The streets whispered his name like a ghost trapped in the alleys where he once walked. The corner store still stood boarded up and peeling paint clung to its frame. Like memories refusing to fade. On the night he vanished a storm had rolled in fierce and sudden, drowning out every sound with thunder and rain. Neighbors claimed they saw him lock up just before midnight, but no one ever saw him again. No one ever found his body. No trace of blood, no broken glass, no sign of struggle, just silence and darkness, and a door that never opened again. His name was Samuel Hargrove, a quiet man with kind eyes and a habit of working late. His store was the heartbeat of the neighborhood, and his disappearance left a cold, aching void that time could never warm. Detectives had combed the area, dug through records, questioned friends and enemies alike, but nothing stuck. Leads went nowhere, tips turned to dust, and over time the urgency faded. New crimes took over, new faces arrived, and Samuel became just another folder in a box buried in the back of the evidence room. The town moved on, but not completely. Old customers still spoke of him in soft voices, and some swore they felt his presence near the store at night. Like the past refusing to let go. The evidence room was a tomb of forgotten tragedies and unanswered questions, lined with shelves of boxes, each holding pieces of lives undone. Officer Maya had only recently joined the force, and she was nothing like the older cops. She was sharp, restless, driven by the thrill of the unsolved, and she had something they did not. Her partner Rex, a police dog with military training, a nose like a compass, and a reputation earned from finding what others missed. Their connection was instant, forged in long hours of training and quiet moments in between. They trusted each other without question. Maya often found herself in the evidence room late at night. Not because she had to, but because she felt something there, something unfinished. She believed that sometimes the truth waited for the right person to come looking, and she was determined to be that person. So when she pulled open the dusty cabinet labeled cold cases and saw the name Samuel Hargrove, she felt a pull deep in her chest, like a voice calling from beneath years of silence. She opened the box and lifted out the contents one by one: faded photographs, receipts, a watch, some torn notes, and finally a leather jacket cracked and weathered with time. Rex perked up, his ears twitched, and he stepped forward slowly, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air around the jacket. Then, without warning, he let out a low growl, not of threat but of recognition, and began to paw at the jacket furiously, eyes fixed on a spot near the collar. Maya froze, heart racing. She had seen Rex like this before, during a drug bust last month, when he uncovered hidden heroin sewn into a couch cushion. He never reacted without reason, never barked at shadows, and now he was telling her something was here, something important, something that could change everything. Officer Maya crouched beside Rex, her eyes tracing the jagged line along the collar of the jacket, where the fabric looked almost unnatural, like it had been tampered with long ago, but carefully enough to fool casual inspection. Her fingers worked, slowly peeling back the edge where the thread felt rougher than the rest. Her pulse quickened as she realized this was not part of the original stitching. Someone had sewn this closed, and whoever it was had meant to hide something deep inside, something they never wanted found. Rex whined softly, pacing in a small circle, then returned to the jacket, nose pressed firmly against the same exact spot every time, like his instincts were shouting louder than words. Maya finally tugged open the seam and reached inside. Her hand brushed against paper, something old and brittle tucked into the lining, like a message lost in time. She eased it out gently, afraid it might fall apart in her hands. It was folded tight and stained at the edges, but she could still make out faint writing, smudged by age and maybe tears. I never meant for it to go that far. The first line said, shaky and uneven, as if written in panic or guilt or both. Maya read the note again and again, the words full of regret and fear and a confession half formed. It mentioned an argument, a name she recognized from the original reports, a former employee named Curtis Dale, who had worked at the shop for only 6 weeks before Samuel vanished. Back then he was questioned but let go due to lack of evidence and no clear motive. Now his name had returned, not from a witness or a rumor, but from the silence of a hidden note forgotten for decades. Maya stared at the note, then looked at Rex, who sat watching her, his eyes alert, his posture still. This was not just a coincidence, this was a breakthrough, one that could breathe life into a case everyone else had buried. She took a photo of the note and logged everything carefully, making sure not to smudge the fragile surface. The original would go straight to forensics for handwriting analysis and chemical testing, but she already felt certain of one thing: this was real, and it was the first honest lead the case had seen in 20 years. By morning the precinct buzzed with renewed energy as Maya presented the note to her captain and explained how Rex had led her straight to it. Some raised eyebrows, others leaned in with interest. The old-timers exchanged glances. None of them could ignore what had happened. The department pulled the original case file, reopened the timeline of events, and sent a request to trace Curtis Dale, now possibly living under a new name in another state, since he had dropped off the grid years ago, leaving no social media, no credit trail just vanished like the man he might have killed. As the day went on, Maya found herself replaying every detail from the night before, the sound of the rain in the old locker, the way Rex moved with certainty, the way the air shifted when she touched that jacket, like she had disturbed something that had been waiting to be found for a very long time. She knew this was only the beginning, but the path was finally open, and she intended to follow it wherever it led. The rain returned that evening, tapping against the station windows like a soft warning, but Officer Maya paid it no mind. She was in the archives room again, surrounded by files and digital scans, eyes locked on a screen showing everything the department ever collected on Curtis Dale, the former clerk whose name was now more than just a footnote in a cold case report. His file painted a quiet picture: someone with no priors, no known enemies, no family nearby, and no clear reason to hurt anyone. But Maya knew better now. She had read his words, and those words spoke of panic and guilt and something darker hiding beneath the surface of his brief employment at Hargrove's Marquetas. She read deeper. She found something strange. Curtis had applied for the job just 3 days before Samuel vanished, and he had never picked up his last paycheck. No forwarding address, no resignation letter, just gone. The day after the disappearance, his apartment had been cleared out in hours, not a trace left behind except a broken lamp and an ashtray full of cigarette butts. Back then it seemed like nothing. Now it screamed red flag. Maya scribbled notes, fast-paced, energized by the way things were connecting, pieces fitting together like a puzzle that had waited years for the right hands. Meanwhile, Rex sat quietly near the door, ears perked, nose twitching occasionally, like he was listening to sounds no one else could hear. His presence was grounding to Maya. He reminded her that she was not alone in this, that something instinctive and loyal stood beside her, ready for whatever came next. She stood up, stretched her arms, and grabbed the old photo of the store interior from the file. It showed the counter, the shelves, and in the background Curtis standing stiffly behind Samuel, eyes staring into the camera without expression. Maya took the photo and the jacket to forensics, where the team had already begun comparing the handwriting from the note to old records. A partial match was confirmed by midday, not enough to arrest, but enough to press forward and reopen inquiries. Maya requested travel clearance and a search warrant for Curtis' current location discovered after tracing a small land purchase made under a false name in rural Nebraska. It was a long shot, but it lined up with the timeline and the lack of activity under his real name since the disappearance. Sheet-packed light took Rex and hit the road as the storm clouds thickened behind them. The drive was long and quiet, broken only by the occasional bark from Rex or the buzz of her phone with updates from the station. The deeper they went into the countryside, the more Maya felt the weight of what was coming, not just answers, but confrontation, a reckoning between the past and present. She gripped the steering wheel tight, her thoughts spinning around what she would say, what he might do, and how far she was willing to go to finish what had begun so many years ago. When they arrived, the sun was setting behind a curtain of trees, casting long shadows across the gravel road and the small house nestled at the end of it. Maya parked the car and looked at Rex, who stared ahead, unblinking, ears stiff. Then she reached for her badge, took a breath, and stepped out into the thick, quiet air of a truth long overdue. The house stood still and silent, like it had been waiting too long for someone to knock. Its paint chipped and the windows clouded with dust, but the porch was clean, the door recently oiled, and the steps showed signs of where. Maya approached slowly, badge in one hand, other hand ready to reach for her belt, her breath steady, but her thoughts loud. Rex moved ahead, nose close to the ground, tail stiff, body tense as he followed a scent no human could trace. She knocked once, then twice, no answer, but movement inside, the rustle of feet, then silence again. She called out, police. Opened the door and waited. Seconds passed that felt like minutes, then the knob turned and the door opened to reveal a man older than his file suggested face, weathered beard, unkempt eyes, tired yet alert. Curtis Dale stood framed in the doorway, staring at the badge, then at Rex, then back to Maya. Without a word, Maya introduced herself, explained why she was there, and handed him a copy of the note. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it, eyes scanning the familiar words, the same words he wrote years ago in fear and regret. His lips parted like he might speak, but nothing came out. Instead, he stepped back and gestured for her to enter. The house smelled like cedar and old coffee and something faintly metallic. She followed him into the living room, where stacks of books lined the walls and a dusty radio played low classical music in the background. Rex circled, slowly sniffing the corners, the furniture, the carpet, stopping twice near the fireplace before sitting still. Maya sat across from Curtis, her voice calm as she asked where he had gone after that night and why he never came forward. He stared at the floor long and hard, then began to speak slowly. Voice cracked and low, he said it was an accident, that Samuel caught him stealing money, and they argued and things got heated and he shoved him, not meaning to hurt him, but the older man fell and hit his head hard on the edge of a counter. He panicked, tried to call for help, but the phone line was dead, storm knocking it out, and by the time he decided to run for help, Samuel was already gone, breathless, lifeless. He didn't know what to do, so he wrapped the body in a tarp, drove it out to the woods. and buried it deep behind his cousin's orchard, which was later sold and abandoned. He said he tried to move on, but the guilt followed him everywhere, so he wrote the note and hid it in the jacket, thinking maybe someday someone would find it and know the truth. Maya listened without interrupting, then asked if he would take them to the location. He nodded slowly, eyes wet, but face calm, as if he had waited his whole life to release this weight. They drove out together, Maya, Rex, and Curtis, the road winding through forgotten farmland and broken fences until they reached the overgrown orchard where time had swallowed everything but memory. Rex jumped out first, tail twitching, pacing near the edge of the trees, then barking sharply once. Twice, then again louder. Maya looked at Curtis, who pointed to the same spot and whispered, "He's still there." The trees stood like sentinels, unmoved by time or confession, their branches tangled overhead, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor where wild grass and weeds had reclaimed the land. Rex moved with purpose, nose low, tail high, ears twitching. As he darted forward into the brush, Maya followed close behind, heart-pounding boots crunching over fallen leaves and broken twigs. Curtis trailed behind, slower shoulders, slumped eyes distant, like he was chasing ghosts. Only he could see they moved deeper into the orchard until Rex stopped suddenly, barked once, then began to dig at the base of a tree whose bark was scarred like something once chained there long ago. Maya knelt beside Rex, watching him claw at the earth with a fierce urgency that made her chest tighten. She grabbed her radio, called it, and gave coordinates, asked for backup and a forensic team, then turned to Curtis, who stood completely still, staring at the ground, his face pale, his lips moving soundlessly like he was saying a prayer. Maya said nothing, just watched as he sank slowly to his knees, hands in his lap, eyes fixed on the hole. Rex was now widening with every swipe of his paws. The soil was loose, darker than the surrounding ground, and after a few minutes of digging, Rex hit something solid, something wrapped in old canvas, torn at the edges, frayed and brittle. Maya held her breath, reached in with gloved hands, and gently cleared the remaining dirt, revealing the shape of a body curled inward like it had been laid to rest in haste, not care. The canvas gave off a faint odor of decay, trapped for decades beneath layers of earth and silence. She stepped back, exhaling slowly, heart heavy with the weight of what they had found. Curtis began to cry, not loudly but in broken breaths that sounded like something between relief and sorrow. Maya didn't move, didn't speak, just let the moment hang in the quiet between them until the sound of sirens echoed faintly through the trees. She turned toward the noise, grateful for the backup, not because she felt unsafe, but because she knew what came next would not be easy. Extraction, identification statements, paperwork, headlines, but none of it mattered more than the fact that Samuel Hargrove was finally found, and his story no longer ended in a question mark. The forensic team arrived quickly, working with precision as they marked the site, photographed everything, and began the process of carefully uncovering the remains. They treated it like a sacred ritual, not just a recovery, but a return. Maya stood back, watching, her mind drifting to the first moment she pulled that jacket from the box, and how one dog's reaction, one moment of instinct, had cracked open a case the world thought dead. Curtis sat quietly on a fallen log, wrists now bound, eyes empty, as if all that was left in him had been buried here too. Maya sat beside him, not speaking, until he finally said, "I thought I could forget, but some things follow you no matter how far you run." She nodded once, looked toward Rex, who sat by the grave, calm and still, a sentinel of truth, watching over the place where silence had finally given way to justice. The drive back to the station was long and quiet, the kind of quiet that speaks louder than words, the kind that lingers between people who have seen something they cannot unsee. Curtis sat in the backseat, hands cuffed, head down, shoulders trembling every so often, as if waves of memory were crashing over him one by one. Maya kept her eyes on the road, but her mind wandered through every detail of the case, from the moment she pulled the jacket from the box to the final shovel of dirt that revealed the truth. Rex rested in the passenger seat, eyes alert, head occasionally turning toward the back as if checking to make sure the past was not slipping away again. Back at the station, the atmosphere had shifted. Officers who once rolled their eyes at cold case files now leaned in, listening closely as Maya briefed the team. Some watched the grainy photos from the scene, others stared at the evidence board where Samuel Hargrove's face now sat under a bold red line marked "Case Reopened." Curtis was taken in for formal questioning, and this time the interview room was not a place for speculation but for confession and truth and closure. Curtis spoke calmly, his voice steadier now, as if telling the story lifted a burden from his chest. He admitted to everything: the argument, the fear, the accident, the decision to hide the body, the sleepless nights, and the years spent living in shadows. He said he tried to build a new life, but nothing ever stuck. He said every time he saw someone in a grocery store wearing a brown leather jacket, he thought it was Samuel. He said he wrote the note the same night and sewed it into the jacket while shaking with grief and guilt, and left it in the evidence box, hoping maybe someday someone would find it and finish what he could not. Maya listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions, but never pushing harder than necessary. She had heard lies before, had sat across from men who spun stories to escape consequence, but this felt different. Curtis did not try to excuse himself, he did not deny his actions, he simply wanted to be seen, to be known for what he did, and for the decades he carried it in silence. The department filed charges and assigned a court date, but the community had already begun to speak his name again, only now with clarity and understanding, and sorrow. Rex was given the evening off, a quiet reward for the dog who had turned the tide of a mystery no human could solve. He lay curled on his blanket beside Maya's desk, tail flicking lightly as officers passed by, some pausing to give him a scratch behind the ears or a quiet thank you. Maya stared at the board once more, at the photos, the timelines, the note now sealed in evidence, and she felt something shift inside. Not pride, not satisfaction, but something deeper, the quiet understanding that this job was never really about arrests or reports. It was about listening to the things others missed, following instincts even when the trail was cold, and believing that no story is ever truly over until someone cares enough to turn the page. The courtroom was filled with a silence that pressed against the walls like a held breath, the kind of silence that follows truth when it has finally come to light. Curtis stood in the center, his hands no longer in cuffs but folded in front of him, eyes lowered, his lawyer beside him speaking in a quiet, measured tone, explaining the events, the confession, the decades spent running not from justice but from himself. Maya sat in the back corner, dressed in uniform, Rex beside her, calm and quiet, his head resting on his paws, eyes fixed on the man who had buried more than just a body all those years ago. The judge listened carefully, reviewing the confession, the evidence, the results of the forensic team who confirmed the identity of the remains and matched the timeline to the exact day Samuel Hargrove disappeared from his shop and from the town that never forgot him. The prosecution pushed for a conviction, the defense asked for leniency, not out of sympathy but because of the rare honesty that came not from fear of arrest, but from a desperate need to finally be seen as human. The judge asked one question before ruling, why did you wait all these years to come forward? And Curtis answered in a voice steady and broken at the same time, I was afraid, but I was more afraid of never being forgiven. Maya watched the faces around the courtroom, saw the shifts in expression from anger to understanding, from sorrow to release. Samuel's daughter, now grown, sat in the front row clutching an old photograph of her father, her eyes never leaving Curtis as he spoke. She had been just a teenager when he vanished, left with questions that no one could answer, pain that no one could ease, until now when the truth finally filled the space that had been left hollow for too long. The judge gave the sentence, time served in isolation followed by supervised release with psychological evaluation. The courtroom murmured quietly, but there was no outrage, no protest, only the collective sigh of a town that had waited too long for closure. Curtis nodded once, as if accepting not just the sentence, but everything that came with it. He was not a free man, but he was no longer haunted. Maya stood slowly and walked out with Rex beside her, her boots echoing softly through the hallway as sunlight streamed through the windows. For the first time since the case reopened, it felt like something had been lifted from the air outside. Reporters waited with cameras and questions, but Maya said nothing, simply gave a short nod and walked past them. She had no interest in headlines or glory. This was not about her, this was about the man who was lost, the man who was found, and the quiet persistence that brought them back together through time, through guilt, through silence broken by a single hidden note, and a dog who refused to ignore what others had missed. Rex barked once softly and Maya smiled without a word, because some victories do not need celebration, only remembrance. Weeks passed and the town began to settle again. The story faded from headlines, but not from memory. The market where Samuel Hargrove once worked reopened its doors under new owners who placed a small framed photo of him by the register, a quiet tribute to a man who had served the community with kindness and who now had a proper resting place thanks to the efforts of a determined officer and her four-legged partner. Maya visited the site once more, alone, this time standing beside the grave marked with a simple stone that read, beloved father and friend, never forgotten. The trees rustled softly above her, and for a moment the world seemed to pause, not in grief but in peace. Back at the station, life returned to routine. The bulletin board filled again with new cases, new names, new puzzles to solve, but pinned quietly in the corner was a copy of the note, the one that broke the silence of a 20-year mystery, preserved in a clear case with a plaque that read, discovered by Rex, the dog who listened when no one else could. Maya often caught younger officers stopping to read it, some of them barely old enough to remember when the case first made the news, their faces thoughtful, as if learning that sometimes justice comes quietly, without fanfare, without force, only patience and instinct and the courage to follow a path others gave up on. Rex was awarded a departmental commendation, a small ceremony held in the precinct parking lot where officers clapped and the captain gave a short speech about loyalty and service and the power of listening. The dog sat proudly, tail wagging, tongue out, soaking up the attention, while Maya stood beside him, not for praise, but because this was a moment worth remembering, a moment when Instinct changed everything when the smallest sign cracked open the biggest silence and brought the truth back into the light. Curtis Dale began his rehabilitation program under supervision, living in a center for nonviolent offenders where he worked in the library and volunteered in a nearby shelter. His letters to Samuel's daughter became regular, quiet attempts to express what words alone could never fix. He never asked for forgiveness, only the chance to carry the weight properly this time. His name no longer hidden, no longer erased, but part of a story that had returned from the shadows. On a quiet Sunday, Maya walked through the park with Rex, the late afternoon sun casting gold across the path. She watched him pause, sniff the breeze, then trot ahead as if chasing a scent that no one else could see. She thought of all the cases still waiting for answers, all the families still hoping, and the stories buried in boxes on forgotten shelves waiting for anyone to notice the detail, the pattern, the truth. She believed more than ever that justice is not always loud. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it hides, sometimes it lies buried in a forgotten jacket until the right moment, the right hands, and the right heart bring it back. And sometimes it walks on four legs with quiet eyes and a nose that never lies, and it never ever gives up.